My friends, at 95 years old, I've learned something about time. It moves differently depending on the stage of life you're in. When you're young, time feels like an endless horizon. The days are countless, the opportunities infinite. The future something so distant it almost feels imaginary. But the older you become, the more you realize that time is not a horizon. It is a companion. It walks beside you quietly, whispering lessons that you only begin to hear when your steps slow down. And when you've lived nearly a century, seen the rise and fall of economies, the collapse of empires, the birth of entire industries, and the transformation of the world as we know it, time becomes the clearest teacher you will ever have. I often tell people that the loudest lessons in life do not come from the things you read, or the things you say, or the things you hope for. They come from the things you survive. I have lived through more financial storms than most history books can hold. Wars came and went. Recessions arrived like unwelcome guests, stayed longer than anyone wanted, and then left, leaving the world permanently changed. Inflation rose and fell and rose again. Technologies appeared like miracles and disappeared like illusions. Yet through it all, one thing remained constant: the importance of placing money where inflation cannot defeat it. People misunderstand inflation. They think of it as some abstract economic term, something politicians argue about on television or economists debate in long reports. But inflation is much simpler and much more personal. It is silent theft. It is the slow erosion of your purchasing power. It is the world charging you for standing still. And most people stand still because they are told investing is hard, risky, complex, or reserved for intellectual elites. Nonsense. Some of the most successful investors I've ever met never went to college, never worked on Wall Street, never studied charts, and never claimed to be geniuses. What they did have was patience. Lazy money, as I call it, is not weak money. Lazy money is simply money placed in the right hands and allowed to do what money naturally does when protected properly. It grows. Not frantically, not dramatically, but quietly, steadily, consistently, and over time, consistency beats brilliance. It beats timing, it beats panic, it beats inflation every single day. Before I tell you about the 5 lazy investments that have beaten inflation for 80 years, let me tell you where that wisdom came from. I'm not someone who gained knowledge from glamorous offices or expensive suits. I earned it from a paper route. I earned it from reading every finance book in the Omaha Public Library by the time I was a teenager. I earned it from sitting in the same small house in Nebraska for decades, watching markets roar and collapse and rise again. I earned it from mistakes that cost me millions, and I earned it from quiet decisions that made me billions. When I was 11 years old, I bought my first stock, 3 shares of Cities Service Preferred. I didn't have a mentor or a strategy. I had a newspaper job, a restless curiosity, and a belief that money could grow if treated correctly. I watched that stock fall. I panicked. I sold too early. I made a tiny profit and thought I was a genius until I watched the stock soar to almost 5 times what I sold it for. That day, I learned the most important investing lesson of my life. Impatience is expensive. Decades later, I watched grown men, educated men, wealthy men, powerful men make the exact same mistake. Panic is universal, fear is timeless, and impatience still costs people fortunes. Inflation doesn't destroy people. Fear does, panic does, poor habits do. That's why lazy investments are so powerful. They remove fear from the equation. Let me share something very personal with you. When you reach 95, you don't measure life in dollars anymore. You measure it in lessons. You measure it in regrets you avoided. You measure it in regrets you didn't avoid. You measure it in the quiet understanding that life is far shorter than you once believed and far richer than you once appreciated. You realize the storms you thought would end you were the storms that strengthened you. And you realize that wealth is not what you accumulate during the calm, but how you behave during the chaos. And now, my friends, we arrive at the first lazy investment. It's the foundation of everything I've built for over 80 years. 1. The index fund advantage, I've said this publicly for decades, and I'll continue saying it as long as I breathe. A simple S&P 500 index fund will outperform 90% of professional money managers over time. People think they need complexity to get rich. They think they need to pick the perfect stock, find the next Apple, predict the next recession, or time the next crash. They don't. They simply need to own America, that's all. When you buy an index fund, you are buying the collective intelligence, labor, innovation, resilience, and ambition of the entire American economy. Inflation can crush a paycheck, but it cannot crush a country. It cannot destroy innovation. It cannot erase progress. For nearly a century, through wars, disasters, pandemics, economic chaos, political division, and unimaginable uncertainty, America has grown. And the index fund has quietly captured every piece of that growth. People sometimes ask me, Warren, what if the economy collapses? I always smile and say, if the entire economy collapses permanently, you won't care about your portfolio. Humanity will have bigger problems. But if the world continues even remotely, as it has for the last 100 years, the index fund will continue growing, not because it's brilliant, but because it is patient. Let me give you a perspective no chart can show. If you had invested $10,000 into the S&P 500 in 1965, the year I took control of Berkshire Hathaway, that $10,000 would be worth over $3 million today without you doing anything. No trading, no timing, no stress, just discipline. Lazy money wins because it does not interrupt itself. It does not sabotage its own growth. It does not panic at headlines. It does not fear inflation because innovation outpaces inflation. Progress outpaces inflation, productivity outpaces inflation, and the index fund captures all of that without asking for your opinion once. But the index fund is not the only lazy investment that beats inflation. There is another one that pays you even when the market turns against you. One that has quietly made me billions of dollars in my lifetime, and it is perhaps the most peaceful investment a person can own. 2. The dividend engine people think dividends are minor small checks, little distributions, something only retirees care about. They couldn't be more wrong. Dividends are the most powerful proof that a company not only survives inflation, it rises above it. Let me pause here, because from this point onward in part 2, I will begin the longer, deeper explanation of dividends, REITs, Treasuries, and the final investment that beats inflation every time. My friends, we left off at the dividend engine, and this is where the quiet magic of lazy investing begins to reveal itself. Many people underestimate the power of dividends, thinking of them as mere pocket change, small quarterly checks that barely cover a cup of coffee. But let me tell you something that few understand. Dividends are the heartbeat of long-term wealth. They are proof that a company not only survives inflation, but grows stronger through it. Every great company I have ever invested in shares its success through dividends. Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Pepsi, these are not just brands, they are steady machines that generate cash while you sleep, cash that rises over time even as the world around you fluctuates. During the 1970s, inflation was punishing. People watched their savings accounts shrink. Bonds became almost worthless, and yet the dividend-paying companies did something remarkable. They raised their payouts. They didn't panic. They didn't complain. They adapted and continued to grow. That is the power of owning businesses that serve human needs. People need food, beverages, toothpaste, medicine, oil, electricity, and household products, regardless of the economic climate. These needs do not vanish during inflation. They become more essential. That is why dividends are the lazy investor's ally. They work quietly, steadily, and relentlessly, building wealth without demanding attention or panic. You simply buy them and allow the natural rhythm of commerce to reward your patience. Now, let's move on to another form of lazy wealth that surprises most investors. Real estate without the headaches of tenants, leaky roofs, and 3 a.m. Calls, I'm talking about REITs, real estate investment trusts. Many believe real estate requires active management, buying homes, collecting rent, fixing plumbing, and hoping the market doesn't crash. That is one way to do it, and it is exhausting. But the lazy investor can own a slice of thousands of properties at once, without ever stepping foot inside a building. Shopping malls, warehouses, hospitals, cell towers, apartment complexes, office buildings, data centers, all managed by professionals who ensure income flows directly to you. And here's the most remarkable part. By law, REITs are required to pay out at least 90% of their earnings to shareholders. That means while inflation erodes the value of cash, your investment is quietly compounding through rental income, property appreciation, and essential demand. Housing, storage, commerce, healthcare, and communication infrastructure are the backbone of human activity. Inflation doesn't destroy this, it strengthens it. Rent increases, property values rise, and your lazy investment grows with each passing year. A REIT doesn't call you at midnight, it doesn't panic, it doesn't negotiate or argue. You simply own it, and it quietly does its job. My friends, we have arrived at the final lesson, the one that ties everything together. I've spent nearly a century watching markets rise and fall, watching fortunes evaporate in a single day, and watching ordinary people quietly amass wealth over decades without ever seeking fame or headlines. And what I've learned is simple, though few truly grasp it. The greatest investment, the one that beats inflation, the one that compounds beyond measure, is not a stock, a bond, a building, or even cash. It is the business of you. When I was a boy, I didn't have much. I didn't have money. I didn't have power. What I did have was curiosity, ambition, and a willingness to learn. I read every book I could get my hands on. I studied newspapers, I memorized numbers, I counted coins, I experimented with ideas, and each small step I took compounded. Every lesson I learned, every habit I formed, every skill I acquired became a part of me. This was my first and most important investment. Not a portfolio, not a dividend, not a property me. This principle is what allows lazy investments to work so beautifully. Because when your mind, your understanding, your judgment grows stronger each day, it magnifies the value of every other investment. The index fund that grows with America becomes a fortune when you understand when to buy and hold. The dividend stocks that drip cash into your account become a river when you reinvest wisely. The REITs that collect rent while you sleep multiply in power when you can spot long-term trends. Treasuries that preserve capital through storms become anchors when you understand the forces of money and inflation. And finally, your own mind, disciplined, informed, patient, compounds without limit. Let me give you a story. When I was 20, I invested $100 in a public speaking course. At the time, it seemed small, almost insignificant. But that class taught me to communicate, to persuade, to lead, to negotiate, and to inspire. Those lessons returned to me millions of times over throughout my life. Not from the stock market, not from real estate, from me. That is the power of personal compounding. It is the only investment that cannot be stolen, taxed away, or destroyed by inflation. No matter how chaotic the economy becomes, no matter how high prices rise, your knowledge, skills, and discipline remain yours. And when you apply them consistently, everything else, money, investments, assets, benefits exponentially. Now, let's revisit the 5 lazy investments that, when combined with your personal compounding, become unstoppable forces against inflation. 1. The index fund advantage. This remains the foundation. By owning a simple S&P 500 index fund, you own a piece of America itself. Every innovation, every business expansion, every industrial breakthrough, and every human effort to improve productivity feeds the growth of that fund. Inflation cannot outpace it because progress is faster than rising prices. And you do not need to worry about timing, headlines, or market swings. You simply buy, you hold, and you allow the world's progress to reward your patience. 2. The dividend engine. Companies that pay consistent, rising dividends are proof that wealth grows even when the world panics. Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble. These are examples of businesses that continue rewarding their investors through every economic cycle. Dividends are steady, predictable, and remarkably powerful, and when you reinvest them, your income grows exponentially year after year, decade after decade. 3. Real estate without lifting a finger. REITs are a brilliant form of passive wealth creation. You don't manage tenants, you don't repair plumbing, you don't worry about market crashes. You own a portion of essential infrastructure, apartments, warehouses, hospitals, data centers, and they generate income that keeps pace with inflation. The beauty of this lazy investment is that the work is done by professionals. You simply benefit. And when combined with your growing knowledge, your ability to analyze markets, and your patience, these assets compound in power. 4. The Treasury Fortress. Treasuries, especially TIPS, protect your wealth when the world seems uncertain. They don't promise the highest returns, but they promise security, consistency, and inflation, adjusted preservation. A protected dollar becomes a compounding dollar, which becomes a fortune when held over decades. They are not glamorous, but they are indispensable. 5. The business of you. This is the final and most powerful asset. All the investments I've described are stronger because of the decisions, discipline, and knowledge of the investor. If your mind grows stronger, every dollar you own, every investment you make, and every opportunity you seize becomes more valuable. Your skills, your judgment, your knowledge, and your habits compound continuously forever. And no inflation, no crisis, no market crash can take that away. If there is one truth I want you to understand, it is this. Time rewards those who prepare, who learn, who act with patience, and who invest in themselves. Inflation is not your enemy. Fear is not your enemy. Panic is not your enemy. Standing still is your enemy. Growth, steady, disciplined, consistent growth is the antidote. So how do you beat inflation for the rest of your life? How do you secure financial peace, dignity, and freedom even in the most uncertain times? By following this simple philosophy: invest in America. Invest in companies that pay dividends. Invest in real estate through professional structures. Invest in safe government bonds that preserve wealth. Invest in yourself, your knowledge, your skills, your judgment, and your ability to create value. Do all 5 of these things, and you will find that inflation becomes irrelevant. You will sleep at night knowing that your wealth is not just surviving, it is quietly growing, protected, and unstoppable. My friends, I have seen billionaires lose fortunes overnight. I have seen ordinary people quietly become millionaires and live full lives. I have watched fear destroy brilliant minds and patience build empires. And when I wake up each morning at 95, grateful for another day, I understand this clearly. Money is a result, not a goal. The goal is clarity, wisdom, and freedom. The investments are merely the tools. Time is your ally. Patience is your weapon. Discipline is your shield, and the business of you growing, learning, compounding is the ultimate inflation. Proof asset. Do this, my friends. Do this consistently. And I promise you, not today, not tomorrow, not at 95, but for generations to come, inflation will never frighten you. Not ever, because the greatest wealth you can have is the freedom to live your life on your own terms, and the confidence that, no matter what happens in the world, you will always rise above it. Now, my friends, we turn to another pillar of lazy investing, U.S. Treasuries. I know many scoff at bonds, thinking low yields are useless in an inflationary world. But there's a reason the United States government has never defaulted on its debt. Treasuries are the fortress in any storm. They behave when the world doesn't. They pay when markets panic. And there is one special class, TIPS, Treasury inflation, protected securities, which automatically rise with inflation. You don't need to time the economy. You don't need to analyze charts. You don't need to read the Federal Reserve's every word. The moment inflation rises, TIPS adjust your principal so your purchasing power remains intact. During recessions, pandemics, and financial crises, treasuries continue paying, silently preserving wealth when everything else around you trembles. Lazy investing does not require genius, it requires assets that behave predictably. Treasuries are a perfect example. Calm, steady, and structured, providing security for your wealth while the rest of the world panics. And at this point, my friends, we've only reached 4 of the 5 lazy investments. Each one is simple, predictable, and accessible. Index funds capture the growth of a nation. Dividend stocks generate income regardless of market panic. REITs let property earn while you sleep. Treasuries provide security and inflation protection, but there is one investment that surpasses all others. One investment that beats inflation not just over decades, but over a lifetime and into the next generation. And that is where we will focus in part 3, the single most powerful investment you can make, the one that ensures every dollar you earn, every hour you work, every lesson you learn compound. Infinitely, I call it the business of you. When you invest in yourself, when you grow your mind, your skills, your habits, your discipline, and your ability to create value, inflation cannot touch you. Nothing in the economy can outpace the person who continues learning, growing, and compounding their own abilities.